There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being too good for your own survival. You know it well, that bone-deep fatigue that settles in when you realize you've been playing by rules that no one else follows, honoring agreements that were broken before the ink dried, maintaining standards that have become the very bars of your prison. You call it integrity. You call it having principles. But what if I told you that your ethics, those beautiful, shining moral certainties you've built your identity around, are the very chains keeping you trapped, while others walk free in the world you voluntarily exiled yourself from? This isn't about becoming evil. This isn't about abandoning your soul to some corporate machine or political game. This is about recognizing that the fortress of righteousness you've constructed around yourself has become your tomb. You built those walls believing they would protect you from corruption, from compromise, from becoming like them. Instead, you've locked yourself away from power, from opportunity, from the very tools you need to create the change you claim to want. Every morning, you wake up carrying the weight of your own moral superiority, every decision filtered through your rigid ethical framework, every opportunity measured against your pristine principles. And every night, you go to bed wondering why the world seems to belong to those who don't share your scruples, your honor, your unwavering commitment to doing the right thing. The cruel truth is this: while you've been polishing your halo in solitude, others have been building empires with the tools you deem too dirty to touch. While you've been choosing the right path over the winning path, they've been choosing results over righteousness. And now you're beginning to see that your commitment to being good hasn't made you virtuous. It's made you invisible. The most dangerous prison is the one you build yourself, especially when you decorate it with noble intentions and call it home. Your ethics have become your cage. Your principles have become your chains. And the key to your freedom lies not in abandoning your values, but in evolving them into something more sophisticated than the black and white thinking that's been holding you hostage. This is your awakening. This is your liberation. This is the death of your naive moral certainty and the birth of something far more dangerous: strategic virtue. You've been telling yourself a beautiful lie for so long that you've forgotten its fiction. The lie is this: that suffering for your principles makes you noble. That every opportunity you've declined, every advantage you've refused to take, every moment you've chosen the harder path, that this suffering somehow elevates you above those who play the game differently. But here's what you haven't wanted to face: your ethics aren't making you virtuous. They're making you a martyr to your own self-righteousness. And martyrs, for all their supposed nobility, are ultimately just beautiful corpses on the altar of their own idealism. You've watched them rise while you remain pure. You've seen them succeed while you maintained your standards. You've witnessed them build influence, accumulate resources, and shape the world while you stood on the sidelines, arms crossed, telling yourself that at least you have your integrity intact. But what good is integrity if it renders you powerless to implement the very values you claim to hold dear? The surgical truth cuts deep. Your moral rigidity isn't nobility. It's fear wearing the mask of virtue. You're afraid of getting your hands dirty, afraid of making the difficult choices that effectiveness requires, afraid of discovering that the world is more complex than your ethical framework can accommodate. So you've hidden behind your principles, using them as an excuse for inaction, for irrelevance, for the comfortable powerlessness of the perpetually pure. While you've been polishing your moral crown in solitude, others have been learning the language of influence, the art of persuasion, the mechanics of power. They understand something you've refused to acknowledge: that good intentions without strategic thinking are as useless as a sword without an edge. That moral authority without the ability to wield it effectively is just elaborate impotence. You've confused being right with being effective. You've mistaken moral clarity for strategic wisdom. You've believed that virtue alone would somehow translate into influence, that righteousness would naturally lead to results, that being good would be enough to create good in the world. But the world doesn't work that way. The world belongs to those who understand that principles must be paired with power, that values must be coupled with strategy, that being right is meaningless if you lack the ability to make that rightness count. The most painful realization is this: your commitment to being good has made you a tool for those who understand that goodness, when inflexible, is just another form of exploitable stupidity. They've been using your predictability against you, your moral certainty as a weapon to keep you manageable, your principles as the very leash by which they lead you. You thought your ethics would set you apart. Instead, they've set you aside. You thought your principles would make you powerful. Instead, they've made you peripheral. The world you wanted to change has continued changing without you, shaped by those willing to work within its actual rules rather than the idealized rules. You wished it followed. They know exactly what you'll do before you do it. Your honor has made you readable. Your principles have made you predictable. Your ethics have turned you into the most manageable person in any room you enter. Think about it. Every moral stand you take, every line you won't cross, every principle you won't bend. You've handed them a complete manual for your manipulation. They don't need to guess your response to any situation. They don't need to wonder how you'll react to any proposal. They know precisely which buttons to push, which appeals to make, which moral frameworks to invoke to get you to do exactly what serves their interests. Your predictability has become their power over you. Your moral consistency has become their strategic advantage. The very thing you thought made you strong, your unwavering commitment to your principles, has become the weakness they exploit most effectively. When they want you to say no to something that serves you, they frame it in terms that trigger your ethical objections. When they want you to say yes to something that serves them, they wrap it in moral language that makes refusal seem wrong. They have learned to play your conscience like an instrument, producing whatever tune serves their purposes while you dance to music you think you're choosing. The cruel irony is inescapable. Your commitment to being good has made you a tool for those who have no such commitment. Your refusal to engage in strategic thinking has left you vulnerable to those who think strategically about everything. Your moral purity has become their most reliable weapon against your own interests. You become the person they call when they need someone principled enough to lend credibility to questionable decisions, the one they consult when they need moral cover for strategic choices, the useful fool who can be counted on to provide ethical legitimacy to whatever agenda they're pursuing, as long as it's presented in the right moral framework. They don't fear your principles, they depend on them. They don't respect your ethics, they exploit them. They don't see your moral consistency as strength, they see it as the most exploitable weakness. In your psychological architecture, you've made yourself manageable through your very commitment to being good, but here's what really cuts. You've sensed this dynamic for a long time. You've felt the weight of being used, the frustration of being manipulated, the exhaustion of always being the one who has to be reasonable, who has to compromise, who has to take the high road while others take the profitable road. You've known, somewhere deep in your bones, that your goodness was being weaponized against you. Yet you've continued playing by these rules because changing them would require admitting something you're not ready to face, that the world operates by Machiavellian principles whether you acknowledge them or not. That strategic thinking isn't the enemy of moral action. It's the prerequisite for moral effectiveness. That being good without being smart is just elaborate self-sabotage dressed up as virtue. Your honor has become your prison. Your predictability has become your weakness. Your moral certainty has become the very chain by which others lead you wherever serves their purposes. The question isn't whether you'll break free from this pattern, it's whether you'll do it consciously, strategically, before it breaks you completely. Machiavelli understood something that your moral education deliberately concealed from you. Morality is a tool, not a master. Your principles are meant to serve your higher purpose, not enslave you to rigid patterns that guarantee your irrelevance. The surgeon doesn't apologize for cutting in the flesh to save a life. The general doesn't mourn the strategic retreat that preserves his army for the decisive battle. The skilled negotiator doesn't feel guilty for withholding information that would disadvantage their position. They understand that true moral sophistication requires the wisdom to know when flexibility serves a greater good than rigidity. You've been operating under the beautiful lie that moral action is always straightforward, that ethical choices are always clear, that good people never have to make decisions that feel uncomfortable in the moment but serve essential purposes in the long term. This childish understanding of morality has kept you locked in patterns of thinking that guarantee your ineffectiveness. Real morality, mature, sophisticated, strategic morality recognizes that the world is complex, that competing goods sometimes require difficult choices, that serving your deepest values often requires tactical flexibility about your surface level rules. The question isn't whether you'll compromise your principles, but whether you'll evolve them into something more nuanced than the black and white thinking that's been holding you captive. This doesn't make you evil. This makes you effective. This doesn't corrupt your character. This develops your intelligence. This doesn't abandon your values. This creates the strategic sophistication necessary to actually implement them in a world that operates by power dynamics, whether you acknowledge them or not. You've been so afraid of becoming like those you despise that you've refused to learn from their methods. You've been so committed to maintaining moral purity that you've avoided developing moral intelligence. You've been so concerned with being right that you've neglected learning how to be effective. But what good is being right if you lack the power to make that rightness matter? The scalpel cuts precisely because it's sharp. Your morality must become equally precise, equally strategic, equally capable of making the cuts necessary to achieve the outcomes that matter. This isn't about abandoning your principles, it's about sharpening them into tools, capable of operating in the real world rather than the idealized world you wish existed. Strategic morality recognizes that sometimes you must be willing to appear wrong to those who don't understand your deeper purpose. Sometimes you must be willing to be misunderstood by those who prefer the comfort of simple explanations. Sometimes you must be willing to carry the weight of decisions that serve long-term goods over short-term appearances. The naive moralist avoids difficult decisions. The strategic moralist makes them consciously, deliberately, with full awareness of their implications and full commitment to their necessity. The naive moralist seeks purity. The strategic moralist seeks effectiveness. The naive moralist fears corruption. The strategic moralist fears irrelevance. Your awakening begins here, in the recognition that your highest values deserve more sophisticated service than your rigid rules have been providing. That true loyalty to your deepest principles requires developing the strategic intelligence to implement them effectively. That moral maturity means learning to distinguish between the means and the ends, the tactics and the strategy, the appearance and the reality. You've been living as only half a person, and the half you've been neglecting is the half that makes the other half effective. Machiavelli knew that true survival, not just biological existence, but the preservation and advancement of what matters most, requires two distinct natures, the lion and the fox. The lion in you knows how to be strong, direct, unwavering. It understands force, commitment, the power of absolute conviction. But the fox has been starving in the basement of your psyche, locked away by your moral squeamishness, atrophied by your refusal to acknowledge that cunning is just intelligence applied to human nature. Your old ethics taught you that foxes are evil, that cunning is corruption, that strategic thinking is somehow beneath the dignity of good people. But what if cunning is simply the ability to navigate complex social realities? What if strategic thinking is just practical wisdom applied to human interactions? What if the fox isn't your enemy, but your neglected ally? Sometimes you must be the lion, direct, powerful, unwavering in your position when someone challenges your boundaries, when your core values are under attack, when the situation requires unmistakable strength, you deploy the lion. But other times, you must be the fox, adaptive, intelligent, strategically aware of angles and possibilities that pure force cannot address. The lion charges forward. The fox circles around. The lion confronts directly. The fox finds indirect approaches. The lion breaks down barriers. The fox finds gates and unlocks them. Both are necessary. Both serve the same master, your ability to achieve outcomes that matter to you. You've been trying to live as only the lion, believing that direct moral force would be sufficient for all situations. But the world is full of problems that cannot be solved by frontal assault, challenges that require subtlety, objectives that can only be achieved through understanding the complex motivations and hidden dynamics that drive human behavior. The fox doesn't lie, it simply understands that truth has timing, that information has strategic value, that sometimes the most direct path to your objective runs through approaches that appear indirect to those who lack your perspective. The fox doesn't manipulate, it influences. It doesn't deceive, it curates the presentation of reality to achieve outcomes that serve your higher purpose. This integration isn't about becoming someone you're not. It's about becoming someone complete. It's about developing the full range of capabilities that effectiveness requires. It's about refusing to handicap yourself by pretending that good intentions alone can navigate the complexities of a world populated by people with conflicting interests, competing agendas, and varying levels of strategic sophistication. The person who can only be the lion will lose to challenges that require finesse. The person who can only be the fox will fail when situations demand straightforward strength. But the person who can be both, who can deploy the appropriate nature for the specific challenge, who can switch between modes as the situation requires, that person becomes formidable in ways that pure lions and pure foxes cannot match. You're not abandoning your strengths by developing cunning. You're not corrupting your cunning by maintaining your strength. You're becoming strategically complete, psychologically integrated, capable of operating effectively across the full spectrum of human challenges. The duality isn't contradiction, it's completion. The fox serves the lion's objectives. The lion protects the fox's operations. Together, they create something more dangerous than either could achieve alone. The capacity for strategic virtue in a world that respects power more than purity. Here's what your rigid moral education never taught you. The appearance of virtue is often more powerful than virtue itself. The person who does good deeds publicly, while maneuvering strategically in private, controls both the moral high ground and the practical advantage. Meanwhile, you've been so concerned with being virtuous that you've forgotten the importance of being seen as virtuous. This isn't hypocrisy, it's sophistication. This isn't deception, it's strategic intelligence. This isn't abandoning your values, it's learning how to make them effective in a world where perception shapes reality, where influence depends on reputation, where your ability to do good often depends on others' belief in your goodness. You've watched others rise to positions of influence, not because they were necessarily more virtuous than you, but because they understood something you refused to learn, that virtue without visibility is often virtue without impact, that moral authority must be recognized to be effective, that the most pristine principles in the world matter little if no one knows you hold them or sees you acting on them. While you've been practicing virtue in private, others have been performing virtue in public. While you've been maintaining your principles in obscurity, others have been demonstrating their values visibly. While you've been choosing substance over style, others have been choosing both and discovering that style often determines whose substance gets heard. The cruel irony is that your commitment to authentic virtue over performed virtue has often resulted in less virtue being implemented in the world. The person who does good quietly while thinking strategically publicly often accomplishes more good than the person who is purely good in private but ineffectively good in public. This doesn't mean becoming fake. It means becoming conscious of the fact that your impact on the world depends not just on your internal state, but on others' perception of your character, your capabilities, your intentions. It means recognizing that managing that perception isn't manipulation, it's communication. It isn't deception, it's ensuring that your actual values are accurately understood by those who need to understand them. The theater of perception operates whether you acknowledge it or not. Others are already making judgments about your character based on limited information, incomplete observations, surface-level interactions. You can either be conscious of this dynamic and shape it strategically, or you can remain unconscious of it and let others shape it for you. Strategic virtue understands that sometimes the greatest good is served by ensuring that your capacity to do good is recognized, respected, and trusted by those who can amplify your influence. That sometimes the most moral action is the one that builds your reputation for morality. That sometimes the most virtuous choice is the one that increases others' belief in your virtue. This isn't about becoming a politician or a performer. It's about becoming someone whose virtue is not just practiced, but recognized, whose principles are not just held, but understood, whose moral authority is not just real, but acknowledged. It's about learning to operate effectively in the social dimension of morality, the interpersonal reality of ethics, the public arena where private virtue must translate into collective influence. You don't abandon your internal compass when you learn to navigate by others' perceptions. You develop the ability to use both navigation systems simultaneously, to serve your deepest values through sophisticated understanding of human psychology, social dynamics, and the complex relationship between intention and impact. The performance of virtue isn't the enemy of virtue, it's virtue's translator, making your internal reality comprehensible and influential in the external world, where your actual impact on human flourishing will be determined. The person you were bound by naive moral absolutism, crippled by strategic ignorance, trapped in the beautiful prison of ethical rigidity must die for the strategist to be born. This isn't a corruption of your character. This is an evolution of your intelligence. This isn't becoming evil. This is becoming real. You're grieving right now, and that grief is necessary. You're mourning the loss of the simple world where good and evil were clearly marked, where moral choices were straightforward, where being right was enough to make you effective. That world was never real, but it was comforting. Its death is painful, but its death is also your liberation. The former, you believed that the world should operate according to your moral principles, and when it didn't, you retreated into the Purity of your own ethical isolation. The new you understands that the world operates according to its own laws of power, influence, human psychology, and strategic dynamics, and that moral effectiveness requires working within those laws rather than pretending they don't exist. This transformation isn't about abandoning your values. It's about developing values sophisticated enough to function in reality, rather than retreating into the fantasy that reality should accommodate your preferences. The world has always operated by Machiavellian principles while wearing the mask of conventional morality. Your awakening isn't about becoming Machiavellian, it's about becoming conscious of the Machiavellian dynamics that were always there. The death of your former self is also the death of your former limitations, the death of your strategic naivety, the death of your useful foolishness, the death of your comfortable powerlessness, the death of your beautiful irrelevance. You're not becoming something foreign to yourself, you're becoming something complete. This psychological rebirth is violent because all real growth is violent. It requires the destruction of old patterns, old assumptions, old identities that no longer serve your higher purpose. It requires facing the uncomfortable truth that your former moral certainty was often just fear disguised as virtue, anxiety disguised as principle, cowardice disguised as integrity. But what emerges from this death is something far more dangerous than what died. A person who maintains meaningful values while possessing the tactical flexibility to achieve important objectives. A person who can be moral without being manipulable, good without being weak, principled without being predictable. The strategist understands what the naive moralist never could, that true virtue requires the intelligence to implement itself effectively. That real integrity includes the courage to make difficult decisions. That authentic goodness sometimes requires doing things that appear wrong to those who don't understand your deeper purpose. You're not becoming someone else. You're becoming someone who was always there, but was buried under layers of conditioning, social programming, and moral education designed to keep you manageable rather than effective. The strategist was always present in your psychology. It was just starved, suppressed, denied the development it needed to serve your highest values. This rebirth isn't comfortable, but it is necessary. The world needs people who can be both good and smart, both moral and strategic, both principled and effective. It needs people who understand that the greatest evil is often the good that remains unaccomplished, because good people refuse to develop the capabilities necessary to accomplish it. Your former self was beautiful, but ineffective. Your emerging self will be complex but powerful. The choice isn't between good and evil, it's between naive good and strategic good, between powerless virtue and effective virtue, between moral purity and moral impact. You are no longer hostage to the beautiful lies of naive morality. You understand now that true virtue isn't about following rules written by others. It's about achieving outcomes that matter to you and to the world you want to create. Your ethics haven't disappeared. They've evolved into something more dangerous, more intelligent, more real. You can be good without being weak. You can be moral without being manipulable. You can maintain your core values while developing the strategic sophistication to actually implement them in a world that respects power more than purity, results more than righteousness, effectiveness more than ethical posturing. This is your sovereignty, the wisdom to know when to be the lion and when to be the fox, when to show your strength and when to conceal your strategy, when to be direct and when to be subtle, when to trust and when to verify, when to reveal your position and when to keep your counsel, when to forgive and when to remember, when to engage and when to withdraw. You understand now that the greatest moral failure isn't impurity, it's irrelevance. The greatest ethical tragedy isn't compromise, it's the good that remains undone, because good people refuse to develop the capabilities necessary to accomplish it. The greatest virtue isn't innocence, it's the sophisticated wisdom that can navigate complexity without losing its essential orientation toward human flourishing. The crown of strategic virtue isn't worn by those who never make difficult decisions. It's worn by those who make difficult decisions consciously, deliberately, with full awareness of their implications and full commitment to their necessity. It's worn by those who understand that moral maturity means accepting responsibility, not just for your intentions, but for your impact, not just for your principles, but for your effectiveness. You are no longer the prisoner of your own principles. You are their master. You no longer serve your ethics blindly. You deploy them strategically. You no longer retreat into moral purity when the world becomes complex. You engage with that complexity using the full range of your capabilities. This doesn't make you like those you despised. It makes you more dangerous than they could ever be, because you combine their strategic intelligence with something they lack: genuine commitment to values beyond self-interest. They can be countered by superior strategy. You can only be countered by someone who combines strategic sophistication with moral depth, and such people are rare. Your transformation is complete. You have become someone who can change the world, not because you are pure, but because you are effective, not because you are innocent, but because you are wise, not because you are simple, but because you are sophisticated enough to serve simplicity. The world belongs to those who understand its rules and have the capability to work within them, while maintaining their essential humanity. You are no longer watching from the sidelines. You are no longer voluntarily powerless. You are no longer hostage to your own ethics. You are free. You are dangerous. You are ready. And if this resonates with something awakening in your own psychology, if you recognize yourself in this transformation, if you're ready to develop the strategic sophistication that your values deserve, then subscribe, because this is just the beginning of your education in the art of strategic virtue, and there are depths to this philosophy that we've only begun to explore. The student is ready. The teacher will appear. Your sovereignty awaits.